He had always started his mornings the same way, with a quick coffee in one hand and a small backpack in the other, carrying a few essentials and a lunchbox for his little one. Life had taught him that mornings were precious and that every second counted. As a single dad juggling work and parenting, he had no time to waste. Yet even in the rush, he noticed things other people overlooked. A bird perched on a streetlight, the first rays of sunlight glinting off a building, the hum of life beginning around him. That morning was no different. He walked down the familiar streets of his neighborhood, nodding at the local shopkeepers who knew him by sight, offering a smile here, a quick good morning there. His mind, however, was partly on work and partly on his child, who was still at home, half asleep, probably wondering when breakfast would be ready. As he approached the tall office building downtown, he saw something unusual. People were gathered near the lobby, glancing up at the elevator shaft, murmuring anxiously. He paused, sensing that something was wrong. He noticed the security guard pacing nervously, speaking into a radio. Then he saw her, trapped inside the glass elevator, her expression a mix of frustration and fear. She was dressed sharply in a tailored suit, carrying a designer bag and wearing heels that clicked against the floor whenever she moved. She looked like someone who was used to being in control, commanding rooms with ease. Yet now she seemed vulnerable, trapped in a small box suspended between floors. Without thinking twice, he stepped closer. His instincts told him to help, even if he didn't know exactly how. He had seen accidents before, small emergencies, and he knew that sometimes the smallest acts of courage mattered more than the grandest gestures. "Are you okay in there?" he asked, raising his voice so she could hear him over the murmurs. She looked down at him, startled. Her first instinct was surprise. She had been trapped alone, expecting perhaps the building staff to handle things. Seeing him there, calm and steady, gave her an unexpected sense of relief. I think so," she said, her voice a little shaky. "I've been stuck here for a few minutes, but it feels like forever." He smiled reassuringly. "You're not alone. Help is on the way. Just take a deep breath. I'll stay right here with you." She nodded, still tense, and leaned back slightly against the glass wall of the elevator. He could see her fingers gripping the railing tightly, her knuckles white. He tried to make her feel at ease, talking quietly, casually, as if they were simply two strangers waiting out a minor inconvenience. "I know elevators can be tricky," he said. "I've had my fair share of small scares. It's amazing how fast your mind starts racing in situations like this." She laughed softly, a nervous sound, but it was genuine. "Yes, exactly. You think about every possible thing that could go wrong, even the unlikely ones." They talked for a few minutes, and he noticed the way her eyes softened as she spoke. There was a hint of vulnerability there, a human side that rarely showed up in her high-profile world. He realized that in that tiny, suspended space, titles and positions didn't matter. They were just two people sharing a moment, caught between fear and relief. Meanwhile, he kept his eyes on her, alert for any sign of panic. He knew it was important to stay calm, to be the steady presence she could focus on. "You know," he said gently, "sometimes it helps to focus on something small. Pick one thing you can see, one thing you can touch, and just concentrate on that. It takes your mind off the rest." She glanced around the elevator, her gaze landing on the simple handrail. She took hold of it, following his suggestion. "Okay," she whispered. "I think that's helping." He nodded, satisfied. "Good, keep doing that. And remember, it's just a few minutes. You'll be out before you know it." As they waited, she began to ask him questions, not the usual small talk, but questions that revealed curiosity about his life. "Do you work in this building?" she asked. He shook his head. "No, I'm just passing through on my way to work. I do a few different jobs. Keeps things interesting, you know?" She smiled, intrigued. "A few different jobs. That must be tiring." He shrugged, trying to sound lighthearted. "It is, but it also keeps me on my toes. And it's worth it. I've got responsibilities. Someone's got to keep the little one fed and happy." Her expression softened even more. "I see, you must be very devoted," he chuckled. "I try. Parenting isn't easy, but it's the best part of my life. Makes everything else worth it." For a moment, she was quiet, looking down at him through the glass. He could sense her respect, though she didn't say it outright. There was something about his calm, genuine presence that contrasted sharply with the fast-paced, polished world she lived in. She realized that while she had spent years learning to handle boardrooms, investors, and media, This man had mastered something equally important: patience, kindness, and resilience in the face of everyday challenges. Then, suddenly the elevator shuddered slightly. He instinctively held out his hand, though there was no way for her to reach it. "It's okay," he said quickly. "That's normal. Don't worry. You're going to be fine." She took a deep breath, steadying herself. "Thank you," she said quietly. "It really helps having someone calm out here." He smiled, brushing off the compliment. "Just doing what anyone would do." But inside he felt a sense of pride. Not the kind that comes from recognition or money, but the quiet satisfaction of knowing he had made a difference in someone's day, even if just for a few minutes. Minutes passed, though they felt much longer. He kept talking, sharing small stories about life, about people in his neighborhood, about moments that had made him laugh or think. She listened, genuinely engaged, and he noticed the tension in her shoulders easing slightly. The fear hadn't disappeared, but it had been replaced by a shared human connection, a reminder that kindness existed, even in unexpected places. Finally, he heard the distant sound of emergency personnel arriving, the commotion in the lobby growing louder. He stepped back slightly to let them take over, giving her space while staying close enough to offer reassurance. The elevator doors opened and she stepped out carefully, her face a mixture of relief and gratitude. She looked at him, her eyes meeting his, and for a moment, no words were necessary. The silent acknowledgement passed between them spoke volumes. He had helped her in a moment of fear, and she had noticed the genuine humanity behind his actions. "Thank you," she said softly, her voice sincere. "You didn't have to stay. You could have walked away, but you didn't. That means a lot." He shook his head, smiling. "It was nothing. Just glad you're safe?" She nodded, clearly wanting to say more, but the emergency team needed her attention. As she walked away, she glanced back once more, and he waved. That brief exchange lingered in his mind, an unexpected moment of connection in an otherwise ordinary day. As he continued on his way to work, he reflected on the encounter. Life had a strange way of presenting opportunities, sometimes in the form of an elevator stuck between floors. And while he had no idea what impact his actions might have in the long run, he knew this. He had made a difference in someone's moment of fear, and that was enough for now. By the time he reached his own office, the city buzzed around him as usual. But something inside him had shifted, a subtle warmth that stayed with him throughout the day. He thought about the CEO, about her vulnerability and her humanity. And for the first time in a while, he felt that life, despite its challenges, had moments of unexpected beauty and connection. Even after the day ended and he returned home to his child, the image of her grateful eyes stayed with him. It was a small thing, yet it reminded him that kindness and courage were not measured by grand gestures or wealth, but by the willingness to act when someone needed help, no matter how brief the moment. And so, that morning's events became a quiet memory he carried with him, one that would ripple in ways he could not yet imagine. After the elevator incident, life slowly returned to normal for both of them, but neither could fully shake the memory of that brief encounter. For him, the memory lingered quietly, tucked between the rhythm of daily life and the responsibilities that never seemed to end. For her, the memory echoed louder than she expected. In her world of high-rise offices, endless meetings, and constant decisions, she rarely paused. Yet something about his calm, reassuring presence stayed with her, a gentle reminder of a reality beyond boardrooms and business deals. He woke up the next morning early as usual, preparing breakfast for his child while thinking about the day ahead. The apartment was small but cozy, filled with laughter and occasional chaos that only children can bring. He moved efficiently, multitasking between cooking eggs and helping his little one get dressed. Yet in quiet moments he would replay the elevator scene in his mind, the look of relief on her face, the way she had gripped the handrail, and the tiny smile she gave when he made a joke to lighten the tension. At work, he shifted through the usual tasks, interacting with colleagues, attending to customer requests, and handling the minor emergencies that popped up throughout the day. Still, his mind wandered back to that woman, the way she had seemed so composed yet clearly vulnerable, and how small acts of care could leave a lasting impact on someone. He realized that moments like these, though brief, reminded him why kindness mattered even in small doses. Meanwhile, she sat in her glass-walled office, looking out over the city, yet feeling strangely disconnected. The past encounter kept resurfacing in her thoughts. She was used to being in control, used to people looking up to her, used to handling crises with authority. But in that elevator, she had felt helpless in a way she hadn't felt in years. The memory of his calm voice and steady demeanor brought her a strange mix of comfort and admiration. She began to wonder about the kind of person who could act so selflessly, someone who didn't care about status or recognition, but simply did what was right. Over the next few days, life went on. He continued to navigate the challenges of being a single parent, juggling shifts, errands, and responsibilities. She returned to her packed schedule, attending meetings, negotiating deals, and making tough decisions for her company. Yet beneath the routine, both of them carried a subtle curiosity about the other. It was not a romantic curiosity, but a human one, a fascination with someone who had, even for a brief moment, made a difference in their day. One afternoon, he found himself thinking about the elevator again, while waiting for his child to finish a school activity. He remembered the way she had looked at him, a mix of gratitude and surprise, and he wondered if she ever thought about that moment at all. He smiled at the thought that sometimes even a few minutes of attention, a calm word or a gesture of care could create ripples in someone's life. That small awareness became a quiet inspiration for him, reinforcing his belief that small acts of kindness mattered, even in a world that often overlooked them. Meanwhile, she could not ignore the memory either. It came to her during a meeting when a project went wrong, and she felt frustrated at a client's unreasonable demands. The tension in the room reminded her of that suspended elevator, and she realized how fragile composure could be when faced with uncertainty. She thought of him in the calm way he had reassured her, the light-hearted way he had distracted her from fear. In that moment, she acknowledged a truth she rarely admitted. Real courage often comes quietly, without applause, without recognition, but with integrity and heart. One morning, while commuting to work, he noticed the same elevator that had trapped her the other day. The building looked busier than usual, but he also noticed something new. People paused at the lobby, quietly discussing yesterday's news about the elevator malfunction. It was a minor incident to most, but for him, it served as a reminder of the encounter and the humanity he had witnessed in her eyes. For a fleeting moment, he wondered if she had shared the story with anyone, or if she had simply tucked it away like an unusual yet memorable experience. For her, the incident stayed on her mind not as news but as a personal reflection. She realized she had been too absorbed in her own success to notice simple gestures of care from others, and meeting him had changed that perspective. She started paying closer attention to small acts of kindness in her surroundings. A colleague offering help without expectation, a stranger giving directions patiently, a barista remembering a regular customer's order. Each small act reminded her of him and the calm assurance he had provided, and she began appreciating the human side of life outside her corporate world. As the days went by, their lives seemed to run parallel. He moved through his routines, sometimes catching himself smiling at a thought or memory. She moved through her office, sometimes pausing by the window, thinking about the unexpected encounter that had reminded her of something she had long forgotten. The importance of genuine human connection. She was fascinated by how someone could leave such a profound impression without expecting anything in return, without seeking recognition or reward. One afternoon, he was walking home from work, carrying groceries and balancing a child on his hip, when a passerby noticed his calm, patient manner and complimented him. He laughed softly, brushing it off, but inside he felt a quiet sense of affirmation. He realized that being attentive and kind in small moments mattered not only to others but also to himself. It reminded him that his actions, no matter how unnoticed, could ripple through someone else's day in ways he might never see. Meanwhile, she began sharing the story quietly with a trusted colleague. Not in a boastful way, but as a reflection on how simple human acts can create lasting impressions. She described his calm demeanor, his humor in the face of anxiety, and the way he had reassured her without judgment. She found herself recommending that her team learn from such behavior, not in business strategy but in human behavior, how genuine care could diffuse tension and foster trust. One evening, he returned home tired but content, sitting with his child as they ate dinner. The child chattered about the day at school and he listened, sharing laughter and stories. In these ordinary, messy, beautiful moments, he realized that his life, while not glamorous, was rich in ways that mattered. He also thought again about the woman in the elevator. Though he had not expected it, that brief encounter had reminded him of the quiet power of presence, of being calm, reassuring, and human when it was needed most. For her, another week passed, and the memory persisted like a gentle echo. She realized that the encounter had shifted something inside her, a subtle change in how she viewed others, how she interacted with people who might otherwise have been invisible in her busy world. She began noticing moments she would have ignored before, appreciating them in a new way. The man's presence had reminded her that kindness was contagious, that small gestures could ripple far beyond their immediate impact. Both of them, in their separate worlds, began seeing life through a slightly altered lens. He saw the importance of patience and the value of small, thoughtful actions. She saw the profound impact that simple kindness could have on someone in a moment of vulnerability. And though they did not know it yet, this shared, unspoken understanding was laying the foundation for something that could change both of their lives in ways neither had imagined. One Saturday morning, he was taking his child to the park, pushing them on the swings, watching their laughter fill the air. He reflected on the week, thinking about the small victories, the moments of joy, and the brief encounters that made life meaningful. And once again, his mind wandered to that woman in the elevator, remembering the tension in her eyes, the relief that had crossed her face, and the quiet gratitude she had shown. He smiled to himself, knowing that even fleeting moments of human connection could leave lasting impressions. For her, that weekend offered a rare pause. She walked through the city streets, observing people, noticing little acts of consideration and reflecting on her own life. She remembered his words, his calm presence, and the simple reassurance he had offered. It struck her that the most meaningful gestures often came from those who had little to gain, from those who acted simply because it was the right thing to do. She found herself hoping that their paths might cross again, though she had no idea how that could happen. In those quiet reflections, both realized the subtle truth that life was made up of these small, seemingly insignificant moments. They discovered that genuine human connection could appear in the most unexpected places, even in an elevator stuck between floors. And though they were apart, their lives had been gently touched by this shared experience. A reminder that kindness, presence, and calm could leave lasting impressions that neither time nor distance could erase. And so, as their separate worlds moved forward, they carried the memory with them, not as a story of heroics or fame, but as a quiet acknowledgement of the human spirit, a reminder that even in a fleeting encounter, two people could meet, connect, and change the way they saw the world, and perhaps even themselves. Life continued in its usual rhythm for him, a mixture of small victories and endless responsibilities. The mornings were still filled with the hurried clatter of breakfast preparation, the soft voice of his child asking questions about the day ahead, and the quiet satisfaction of knowing he could manage it all. Even as he moved through the routines of work, errands, and parenting, the memory of the woman in the elevator remained in the back of his mind, like a gentle whisper reminding him that small moments could carry meaning far beyond what was visible. That week, he faced the usual challenges. A late bus threatened to make him miss a meeting, a broken appliance at home needed immediate repair, and work brought unexpected demands. Yet in each instance he approached life with the same calm, steady presence he had shown in the elevator. He had learned that patience and resilience were not just qualities to admire. They were necessities to survive and thrive. Even the brief encounter with her had reinforced that belief, subtly reminding him that the world could be kinder when people chose empathy over indifference. Meanwhile, she navigated her corporate world with her usual precision. Meetings blurred together, deadlines loomed, and decisions weighed heavily on her shoulders. But her thoughts often drifted back to him. She remembered how he had remained composed when she was anxious, how he had cracked light jokes to ease the tension, and how effortlessly he had reminded her of her own humanity. In her life of constant pressure and high expectations, those few minutes felt like a rare oasis, a pause that reminded her of a world outside boardrooms and profit margins. One day, during a hectic morning at her office, she felt the familiar stress bubbling up. A high-stakes meeting had gone wrong, and her usual composure threatened to crack. She closed her eyes for a brief moment and remembered his calm voice, the simple way he had helped her breathe through the fear. The memory grounded her, reminding her that fear was temporary and that the presence of someone steady could make all the difference. It was not a solution to her work problems, but it was a reminder that kindness existed in ways that did not require power or authority. Back in his world, he continued to teach his child the small lessons that life often offered, sharing moments over homework, cooking meals together, and even dealing with small conflicts at home. He imparted lessons of patience, empathy, and integrity. He knew that these everyday teachings mattered, that small actions built character just as surely as grand gestures built reputation. Yet he also carried a quiet curiosity about her, not in a romantic sense but in a human sense, wondering about the life of the woman he had helped, wondering if she ever thought about that brief encounter the way he did. Their worlds, while separate, began to move in subtle parallels. He noticed small things around him, a neighbor helping someone carry groceries, a stranger giving directions patiently, and he felt the same warmth he had felt in the elevator. She, on the other hand, began to notice acts of consideration in her office and in the city around her. A junior employee waiting patiently to ask a question, a colleague offering advice without judgment, even a passerby giving up a seat in a crowded subway car. All these small gestures reminded her of him. It was as if the world had subtly shifted, teaching her that quiet acts of humanity mattered just as much as big accomplishments. One evening, as he returned home from a long day at work, he found himself pausing at a crosswalk, watching a mother helping her child navigate the busy street. He smiled to himself, recognizing the familiar rhythm of human care and attentiveness. It reminded him of his own life, of the little ways he showed love and protection every day. And somewhere in that reflection he thought again of her, the woman in the elevator, and the way her eyes had expressed surprise, gratitude, and relief all at once. It had been a fleeting moment, yet it had left an impression he couldn't shake. Meanwhile, she found herself reflecting more often on the meaning of influence and impact. Her role demanded authority and decision-making, but she began to see that influence was not always about power or status. Sometimes it came quietly in small acts of reassurance and a calm presence when someone was in distress. She realized that the man in the elevator had demonstrated a form of leadership she rarely saw, one rooted in empathy and integrity rather than titles or accolades. It was a lesson she carried forward in her own interactions, encouraging her team to consider the human side of every decision, not just the business side. As days turned into a week, he continued with his life, but a sense of anticipation began to grow quietly inside him. Not expectation, but a gentle curiosity, the kind that arises when you meet someone whose presence lingers longer than it should. He wondered if she had spoken about the incident, if she had remembered the calmness he had offered or the way he had tried to ease her fear. He didn't seek recognition, but the thought that he might have left an imprint on someone else's life gave him a quiet satisfaction. She, too, felt a growing desire to reconnect, a sense of unfinished acknowledgement. The brief encounter had been meaningful, and she realized that expressing her gratitude in some tangible way was important. It wasn't about repayment or obligation. It was about honoring a moment of shared humanity. She began thinking about how to find him, how to express what those few minutes had meant. She didn't know how it would happen, but the idea that she could make a connection beyond that moment gave her a sense of purpose she hadn't felt in a long time. One afternoon, he was at the grocery store, juggling shopping bags and a child who insisted on picking out every brightly colored candy. The chaos of daily life felt familiar, comforting even in its ordinary rhythm. He paused briefly in the aisle, considering what dinner would look like tonight when a passerby mentioned the recent elevator incident downtown. She was described as a high-profile executive who had been temporarily trapped, and he realized with a quiet amusement that he had unknowingly become part of her story. It was a reminder of how small moments could ripple beyond their immediate space, touching lives in ways one might never see. At the same time, she began quietly inquiring through mutual contacts, trying to find a way to reach him without intruding. She wanted to thank him, not for the recognition but for the reminder of humanity he had offered during a moment of fear. In a world where people often moved past each other without noticing, she wanted to ensure that his gesture was acknowledged, that someone saw the kindness and integrity he had shown. It was a small mission, but an important one, and it gave her a quiet sense of purpose amidst the busy chaos of her schedule. Back in his apartment, he spent evenings reading bedtime stories, tucking his child in and reflecting on the day. Even in the quiet moments, he thought about the way the world could change with small gestures of care. He recalled the fear in her eyes, the relief when help arrived, and the subtle connection they had shared. It was not a story for anyone else. It was a personal understanding, a quiet acknowledgement that life was full of brief but meaningful encounters. For her, evenings were often spent in reflection as well. She found herself walking past the city lights, thinking about the simple human connection they had shared. It was a lesson she had not expected to learn in a day filled with meetings, phone calls, and deadlines. She realized that the moments that mattered most were often those where someone showed care without expectation, where vulnerability was met with understanding, and where humanity took precedence over everything else. As the days progressed, both of them began to carry a subtle hope, though unspoken and unnamed. He hoped in a quiet way that life might offer another moment to see her, not because he needed anything, but because the encounter had reminded him of the power of being present for someone else. She hoped in her own way that she might find a way to express her gratitude, to acknowledge that the brief moment they shared had changed her perspective in ways she hadn't anticipated. In these parallel reflections, their lives moved forward. He continued his routines with resilience and care, learning that small acts of kindness were both powerful and transformative. She navigated her high-stakes world with renewed awareness, recognizing that influence was not measured by authority alone, but by the quiet, meaningful ways people impacted each other. And though their paths had diverged for now, the bond formed in a suspended elevator lingered, quietly shaping their perceptions and actions. It was a subtle reminder, in both of their lives, that moments of human connection often appear unexpectedly. They could come in a brief encounter, a shared smile, or a calm word offered when it was most needed. And though life moved forward, busy and relentless, these moments had the power to linger, to inspire, and to remind people of the importance of empathy, patience, and genuine care. As he prepared his child for bed one evening, he looked out the window at the city skyline, noticing the same buildings that had framed their first encounter. A quiet sense of anticipation filled him, not for recognition or reward, but for the possibility that the story was not yet finished. Somewhere in that vast city, she too might be thinking about the same thing, and the thought brought a smile to his face. She, in her penthouse office, glanced out at the city lights as well. A quiet determination grew within her to reconnect, to acknowledge the moment fully, and to ensure that the gesture of kindness he had shown was honored in some meaningful way. She realized that small acts, when sincere, could resonate far beyond their immediate circumstances, creating ripples that neither time nor distance could diminish, and so the stage was set for the next chapter of their story. Both of them carried the memory, the lesson, and the subtle hope forward. The brief encounter in the elevator had not only left an impression, but had also prepared them for what was to come, a moment when their worlds might intersect again, and when words, unspoken yet powerful, could change everything. Days passed, and for him life continued much the same. Early mornings, work, errands, and evenings spent helping his child with homework or reading bedtime stories filled his routine. Yet amid the usual rhythm, there was a quiet curiosity lingering in the back of his mind. He remembered the woman in the elevator, the calm she had sought, the subtle gratitude in her eyes, and the fleeting connection they had shared. He had never expected anything to come of it, yet he felt a gentle anticipation, as though life had something more in store, though he had no idea what it could be. For her, the past few days had been filled with the usual pressures of work, meetings that ran back to back, urgent emails, and the constant weight of responsibility. Yet the memory of him persisted. She found herself thinking of him in quiet moments during lunch breaks or while waiting for a meeting to start. She realized that the brief encounter in the elevator had left a mark on her, not because it was dramatic or life-changing in a conventional sense, but because it reminded her of something she had almost forgotten, the quiet power of kindness and human connection. One morning she made a decision. She would find him, not because she needed to repay him or to seek attention, but because she wanted to thank him properly, to express her gratitude for the way he had helped her when she felt vulnerable. She began asking around discreetly, speaking to building staff, receptionists, and security guards, looking for any clue that could lead her to the man who had left such an impression. It was an unusual pursuit for someone in her position, and yet she felt a quiet urgency. This was not about status or obligation. It was about acknowledging the significance of a small moment that had touched her deeply. Meanwhile, he continued his daily life. He went about his jobs, handled household responsibilities, and engaged in playful chaos with his child. The weeks were busy, yet the memory of that encounter occasionally surfaced. He had not thought much about recognition or reward. Helping someone in a moment of fear had been enough. Still, there was a quiet satisfaction in knowing he had acted with integrity and care. In the back of his mind, though, he sometimes wondered if she had ever thought about him after that day, if the brief connection they shared had meant anything at all beyond that moment. The city was bustling one afternoon when their paths began to move closer to crossing again. She had finally received a lead. A security officer recalled seeing him in the building a few times, and through that, she learned which block he lived near. She felt a mix of excitement and nervousness. Approaching someone she had only briefly met was unfamiliar territory, yet she knew it was important. The desire to express gratitude was stronger than any hesitation. She wanted him to know that his calm, reassuring presence had mattered in a way that her corporate achievements never could. He, on the other hand, had been running errands that afternoon, pushing a stroller while carrying groceries, navigating the crowded streets with practiced skill. His focus was divided between the task at hand and keeping his child safe. But he noticed something unusual, a presence, a sense that someone was observing him with purpose. He looked up briefly and caught sight of her from across the street, recognizing her instantly. There was no mistaking the woman from the elevator, the confident posture, the composed face, and the eyes that seemed to hold a mix of gratitude and determination. She crossed the street with purposeful steps, feeling a mixture of relief and nervousness. She was about to speak to a man she had met only once, in circumstances that had been stressful for both of them, yet the significance of the moment made her heart race. She approached him cautiously, offering a polite but sincere smile. "Excuse me," she said softly. "I hope you don't mind me approaching you like this, but I wanted to find you." He paused, slightly surprised, but recognized her immediately. "You're—" "The elevator," he said with a small smile. "I didn't expect to see you here." She nodded, a little self-conscious but determined. "Yes, I remember. I wanted to thank you properly. The way you helped me, stayed calm, and reassured me. It really meant a lot. I've been thinking about it ever since." He blinked, momentarily speechless. Few people had ever expressed such heartfelt gratitude. He had not expected this acknowledgement. He had not even thought it necessary. Yet hearing her words now, seeing the sincerity in her eyes, left him genuinely moved. "Thank you," he said softly, finally finding his voice. "I'm glad I could help. That's really kind of you to say." She smiled, noticing how his humility matched the calm, steady presence she had seen before. "You don't understand," she said. "It wasn't just about the elevator. It was about everything. Your calmness, your kindness. It reminded me of what really matters even when life feels overwhelming. People like you, they make the world better even without realizing it." He felt a warmth spread through him, a quiet sense of validation he had never expected. It wasn't about fame or recognition. It was about being seen for who he truly was, for the values he carried and the way he treated others. He looked at her, still processing her words, and realized that this was one of those rare moments when life felt remarkably honest and sincere. She continued, choosing her words carefully. "I've realized that in my world, everything moves so fast, people are always chasing something, and we forget the little things that matter, the compassion, the patience, the genuine care for others. You reminded me of that. You showed me that even in a moment of fear, someone can be kind without expectation. That's rare, and it matters more than you can imagine." He nodded slowly, letting her words sink in. He had lived a life of challenges, balancing jobs, parenting, and responsibilities that often felt overwhelming. Recognition was rare and praise even rarer. Yet here was someone, a stranger in a way, whose words validated his quiet, consistent efforts to act with integrity and care. He felt a mixture of humility and gratitude, unsure how to respond but deeply moved. She paused, studying his face, noticing the subtle expressions of surprise, humility, and sincerity. "I wanted to find you," she said quietly, "because I couldn't let it go without saying thank you. You don't often get acknowledged for the little things you do, but those little things, they can change someone's day, sometimes even their life." He smiled, finally finding the right words. I appreciate that. Honestly, I didn't do anything remarkable. I just did what I thought was right at that moment. She shook her head, her expression softening. It's exactly that. Doing the right thing without thinking about it, without expecting anything, that's remarkable. It takes strength and character, and I wanted you to know that someone noticed. For a moment they simply stood there, sharing the quiet understanding that had formed between them. The city moved around them, cars honking, people walking past, the hum of life continuing. But in that small bubble, time seemed to slow. Words had been exchanged, but more importantly, a connection had deepened, one rooted in sincerity, respect, and shared humanity. He realized then that this moment was more than just acknowledgement. It was a reminder that human connection could appear in unexpected ways, that even small acts of care could ripple outward, affecting others profoundly. He felt seen, understood, and valued in a way that went beyond conventional praise or recognition. She, in turn, felt a sense of relief and satisfaction. She had expressed what she had carried quietly for days, acknowledging the impact of his actions in a way that felt honest and heartfelt. She recognized that this simple act of gratitude had created a bridge between their worlds, a reminder that kindness, integrity, and genuine presence were qualities worth honoring and remembering. As the conversation drew to a close, they both lingered in the shared silence, savoring the moment. He felt a quiet pride in having made a difference, while she felt a renewed sense of appreciation for the people who quietly make the world better. There was no need for grand gestures or elaborate explanations, just the simple acknowledgement that human connection mattered, and that small acts could leave lasting impressions. Before parting ways, she smiled once more. "Thank you," she said again, softly but firmly, as if to make sure he understood. "I won't forget this." He nodded, a quiet smile spreading across his face. "Neither will I," he said. And with that, they went their separate ways, carrying the memory of the encounter, now deepened by acknowledgement, into their respective lives. And though life would continue with its usual rhythm, both of them knew something had shifted. The brief encounter in the elevator had been important, but this meeting, this acknowledgement, had made it unforgettable. It was a reminder that the smallest acts of kindness could resonate far beyond their immediate moment, creating connections that left lasting impressions on both giver and receiver. After their second encounter, life for him felt subtly different. The routine of early mornings, work, and caring for his child continued, but there was a quiet sense of fulfillment lingering in the back of his mind. The words she had shared with him, the sincere gratitude, the acknowledgement of his calmness and kindness, resonated deeply. He realized that sometimes the smallest gestures in life could leave the largest impact. Helping someone in need, simply being present, had not only changed her day but had also created a ripple effect that touched both their lives in ways he had never anticipated. He returned to his daily routines with a renewed sense of purpose. Preparing breakfast, getting his child ready for school, juggling his multiple jobs, everything continued as before. But now there was an added layer of reflection. He understood more clearly that every small act, no matter how ordinary, could matter. Even the moments he might have dismissed as inconsequential, the patient way he explained homework, the extra effort to comfort his child after a minor fall, the simple polite gestures at work. These were the threads that wove the fabric of kindness into the world around him. For her, the days that followed were similarly transformed, though in ways more subtle. She continued to navigate the high demands of her corporate life, making decisions that affected hundreds of people, yet she carried with her the memory of him. The calm, steady presence he had offered in the elevator, and the sincerity of his words during their later meeting reminded her that,